Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all in my class. This is your English class and I am your subject teacher, Miss Fauzia. We had started with Unit 3, that was Duty and Responsibilities. As I told you earlier that this unit contains 3 readings. Lesson from the Battle of Uhud, Lingkuan Gorge and Poem If. We had done the first part of the unit, that was lesson from the Battle of Uhud. We have to start with Lingkuan Gorge. This one is a story, and this story, as its name suggests, Lingkuan Gorge. What we have to understand, what is the pronunciation of this word Gorge, that is gorge. Lingkuan is the name of the place. So this one is a proper noun. Lingkuan Gorge, this one is actually ravine. It was actually एक घाटी है और उस घाटी का नाम क्या है? Lingkuan. So this heading, this title, it has a subtitle as well, that is a man should never leave his post. And this is the lesson that we will learn from the story as well, that a man should never leave his post. And this story is written by Tu Peng Chang, as the name itself suggests that the writer is Chinese. So this story is written by a Chinese writer whose name is Tu Peng Chang, and the name of the story is Lingkuan Gorge. And the lesson that we will learn from the story, that a man should never leave his post. So first we will talk about the objective. When we will go through the lines of the lesson, when we will read the lesson, then you people will be able to understand that the model and legal obligation in journal. So before I start, I would like to talk about the author. About the author, his birth year is 1921 and his birthplace is Shanxi. The profession that he had chosen for himself, that he was a journalist and he was a writer as well. He had worked in a newspaper whose name was New China News, and his famous novels are Defend Yan'an, that was written in 1954, and In Peacetime, that was written in 1958. So this story is actually an extract from his novel In Peacetime. So before we start, we must know few things. As in the story, few names have been mentioned. First one was Pauki Chengtu Railway, and this railway is now called Baoji Chengtu Railway. That was China's first electrified railway that was completed in 1958, and it is the first mountain railway joining northwest and southwest China, and it runs 669 kilometers. So what we need to understand before we start this lesson, that actually that writer, he was on that railway station, right? He was working on it. He was the head of the material department and he had been working on that railway station. This railway station was known as Baoji Chengtu Railway when it started, and later its name was changed. When it started, its name was Pauki Chengtu Railway. Then its name was changed to Baoji Chengtu Railway, and that was China's first electrified railway that was completed in 1958. And actually this was the railway station that joined the northwestern side of China with southwestern side of China, and the total length of that railway is 669, right? So this railway station has been mentioned over here. On that railway station, that person, the writer, had been working as the material head. Then second thing that we must know, what is a gorge. Actually, it's a narrow valley between hills and mountains, typically with steep rocky walls and a stream running through it. You can see over here, this one is the path, and on the sides of this path are the steepy rocky walls. Right? You can see over here the mountains. Actually, it's a narrow valley between the hills and mountains. You can see this path, it was actually between these steepy mountains, और ये जो स्टीपी माउंटेन्स हैं इनके बीच में से रास्ता गुजर रहा है, और वो एक्चुअली इसको हम कहते हैं गॉज, एंड इन उर्दू वी कैन से दैट दिस वन इज़ घाटी, इसको हम घाटी कहते हैं, राइट. सो द नेक्स्ट वन इज़ that we must know about the setting of the story. Actually, this story takes place inside a cave in Lingkuan Gorge, and it is the evening time in the snowy winter season. सीज़न कौन सा है? विंटर सीज़न है. और टाइम कौन सा है? दिस वन दैट वाज द इवनिंग टाइम. और कहाँ पे ये स्टोरी पूरी जो सेटिंग ऑफ द स्टोरी है, दैट वाज इनसाइड द केव इन दैट लिंक्वन गॉज, जो घाटी है, उस लिंक्वन घाटी जो है उस वहाँ पे एक केव मौजूद है जहाँ पे ये पूरी की पूरी स्टोरी जो है वो दैट टुक प्लेस. सो द कैरेक्टर्स ऑफ द स्टोरी, we have just few characters in the story. First one is the narrator, that was the chief of the material department. The second one is Cheng Chu, he was a small boy of 7 or 8. Then Pao Cheng, that was a baby girl. So the first two characters are very important because the whole story revolves around these two characters. Pao Cheng is a character, but this character is the passive one, had said nothing and had played no role, but just name had been used. And this character is also important because actually Cheng Chu, he was looking after that it was his duty to look after the sister, right? So actually the two characters who had opened the story and who actually had the story, made the story, that was the narrator and the Chang Chu. Then the theme of the story is that a particular task or action that a person is bound to perform is the legal and moral responsibility to be fulfilled by not leaving his post. This boosts a person's self-esteem and self-worth. Okay, if you are a student, then definitely what is your duty? Your duty is to work hard. Your duty is to pay attention to your studies. Your duty is to fulfill the task that has been assigned to you, right? And before completing that task, if you people leave your position, if you people leave your place, then definitely you will not be able to reach to your destination. You will not be able to achieve your target. So when you people have this sense of responsibility that by working hard you can achieve your target by doing your studies, definitely all these things would boost a person's self-esteem and self-worth. You people will come to know that when you fulfill a task, when you people do your responsibility, then you people will feel highly esteemed, and you people will feel your own worth. So is the lesson of the story. Okay, let's have a reading of the story. The snow, already more than half a foot deep, obliterated the line between earth and sky behind a hazy white curtain. I had been following the path of the future railway for 40 kilometers. Although I could hear the roar of machinery further back in the hills, I had seen neither work sites nor workers. So over here, he was talking about the snow. Snow was falling, and how much snow had fallen? That was more than half a foot deep. इतनी बर्फबारी हो रही थी कि वो कितनी डीप हो चुकी हुई थी? एक हाफ फुट तक डीप जो है वो बर्फबारी हो चुकी हुई थी. That obliterated means that hindered the line between the earth and the sky behind a hazy white curtain. So when the snow was falling, it was making a curtain. Metaphor has been used, and this metaphor is used for this white curtain is used for the snow. When it was falling, it was actually creating a line. It was creating a vague curtain between the earth and the sky. राइट. सो हमें क्या होता है जब हम अर्थ एंड स्काई के बीच में एक लाइन का डिफरेंस होता है, यू कैन सी दैट हराइजन. सो बिकॉज ऑफ दैट स्नो, बिकॉज ऑफ द कर्टन ऑफ द स्नो, दिस सीन हैज़ बीन ऑब्लिटरेटेड, दिस सीन हैज़ बीन hindered. I had been following the path of the future railway for 40 kilometers. जो future railway वो बना रहे थे, that would become a future railway. वहाँ पे वो कितना फासला तय कर चुका हुआ था. He had covered a 40 kilometers of the distance on that site, and although I could hear the roar of machinery further back in the hills, I had seen neither work sites nor workers. So what he says over here, again he had used the word roar as a metaphor because it's a lion who roars, but he used that word of roar for the machinery, right? So the machinery sound, actually he still could hear, though he had covered 40 kilometers of the distance along that railway line, and on the hill, till that distance, till that area that he had covered, he had seen neither work sites nor workers. Entering Lingkuan Gorge, my irritation increased. Even in clear weather, in this gorge the sun never shone. It didn't matter where you looked up along the twisting course, the most you could see of the sky was a patch no bigger than a palm of your hand. Now it was dusk, and the swirling snowflakes and the gale made every step a struggle. So when he entered into that Lincoln Gorge, जब वो इस घाटी में दाखिल होता है, तो उसकी इरिटेशन जो है, उसका जो गुस्सा है, it also increased. Because actually, even in the clear weather, in this gorge, the sun never shone. So it was in such a place जहाँ पे सूरज कभी भी चमका ही नहीं था. It did not matter where you looked up along the twisting course. The most you could see of the sky was a patch no bigger than a palm of your hand. Sky कितने साइज में नज़र आता है, कहते कहीं पे भी आप वहाँ से गुजरे along that twisting course, तो वहाँ पे sky जो है वो आपको इतना ही नज़र आएगा जितना कि palm of your hand है. So now it was dusk, and the swirling snowflakes and the gale made every step a struggle. So it was an evening time, and the snow was falling. These were swirling, these were twisting, these were moving in round and round, and that icy storm, that snowy storm, made every step a struggle. Definitely, when the snow was falling, it hindered his way, and he was not able to walk steadily, and it was dark as well, so it was not easy for him to cover that distance to reach to his destination early. So here is the glossary. You can see the words which are difficult to understand, the meanings are given over here. You can take the help when you people are doing the reading by yourself. Construction in the gorge was very busy. Everywhere people were at work. Generators, cement mixers, air compressors shook the ground. Hundreds of the light bulbs gleamed dim and yellow. Electric wires, crisscrossing like a giant spider web, were scarcely visible, but I could see the overhead cables and their pulley cars sliding back and forth loaded with materials. So when he entered into the gorge, he could see over there the construction work, it was going on, and everyone was doing their work, and generators, cement mixers, air compressors, definitely where the something is being constructed, these things must be there, and with their sounds, the whole ground it shook. So hundreds of the light bulbs that gleamed, that shone dim and yellow, electric wires that are crisscrossing, passing through each other. They are like a giant spider web. अब उसने यहाँ पे सिमिली यूज़ कर ली है कि व्हेन द इलेक्ट्रिक वायर्स, आप खुद भी देखिए अपने कंप्यूटर की जब वायर्स को आप अटैच करते हैं वो क्रिस क्रॉस करती हैं और एक जाइंट वेब की तरह, स्पाइडर वेब की तरह जो है वो एक जाला सा बना लेती हैं. बट दिस वॉज scarcely visible, hardly visible because of the snow. But I could see the overhead cables and their pulley cars sliding back and forth loaded with material. जिस तरह से केबल कार्स होती हैं इसी तरह से उसको वहाँ पे जो है चूँकि हिली एरिया है तो वहाँ पे से पुली कार्स जो है वो आगे पीछे की तरफ मूव कर रही थी और उनके अंदर क्या था, मटेरियल वाज लोडेड ऑन दोस पुली कार्स. Hungry, cold, I tripped and fell, scraping my hands. Enough, I would find some place under a cliff, out of the wind, and rest a few hours. If I reached the material depot tomorrow morning by 10 o'clock, that still wouldn't be too late. So it was cold night, it was cold evening, and he was hungry as well, and he fell down. He just stumbled and he fell down. स्क्रैपिंग माई हैंड्स, वो अब बर्फ़ पे गिरता है, उसके हाथों पे चोट लगती है, छिल जाते हैं. Enough, I would find some place under a cliff. So he had decided that that would be enough. Means he had hurt himself, he just fell down, he was feeling hungry, he was feeling cold. So he had thought that I should find some place under a cliff, and out of that wind, out of that stormy wind, out of that gleam, he should take some rest for a few hours. If I reach the material depot tomorrow morning by 10 o'clock, that still wouldn't be too late. So he thought that till 10 o'clock he should have to reach to the destination. So if he would reach over there by 10, then it would not be too late. Stumbling around in the dark like this, I was liable to fall into some deep ravine, and that would be the end of this material department chief. I would have to be put on the used up list. So he himself assumed that the weather is not very fine over there. The snow was falling and it was dark and dusky, and definitely he was feeling cold and hungry, and he fell down once. So he thought that if he would go on moving in that very way, he may fall into some deep ravine, किसी घाटी में, साइड वैली में वो कुछ गिर सकता है. और इस तरह से ये जो मटीरियल डिपार्टमेंट का चीफ है, he was calling himself the material department chief, he would die in that very way if he would fall down into some ravine. So, and definitely nobody would come to know about his end, and he was put on the used up list. जो चीज़ें इस्तेमाल हो चुकी होती हैं, मतलब वो अपने काम के लिए अगर कहीं गिर विर गया तो यूज्ड अप हो जाएगा फॉर हिज ड्यूटी, तो उसको जो है यूज्ड अप मटेरियल में लिख दिया जाएगा एंड नथिंग वुड हैपन. सो ही थॉट दैट आई शुड टेक केयर ऑफ माई सेल्फ, आई शुड think about my safety first, as the weather is not very fine and suitable for him to move further. So by 10 o'clock he would be able to reach to his destination, and that wouldn't be too late. I noticed a path leading to a cave into the cliffside. A door curtain hanging in the entranceway showed that the cave was undoubtedly occupied by workers. Grasping branches along the steep path, I hauled myself up to the door and entered. So what did he notice? He saw a path, and that path was leading to a cave in the cliffside. पहाड़ी के साथ उसको क्या नज़र आता है, उसको एक केव नज़र आता है, एक रास्ता नज़र आता है, that was leading up to the cave. और उस केव के डोर पे he could see a curtain hanging in the entrance way, and it was also a sign that this cave was undoubtedly occupied by workers. Those who had been working in that Lingkuan Gorge, they had occupied that cave. So grasping branches along the steep path, I hauled myself up to the door and entered. So in order to reach to that cave, he had to take the support of the branches along that steep path. शुरू में ही आपको बताया कि भी जो उसके गिर्द के जो पहाड़ थे वो बहुत स्टीपी थे, बहुत उसमें स्ट्रेट थे, ढलान वाले थे. सो उस पे चढ़ना जो है वो दैट वाज अ रिस्क एज वन कैन फॉल फ्रॉम द स्टीपी पाथ. सो व्हाट ही डिड, ही ग्रैब्स द ब्रांचेस, जो इर्द गिर्द जो पौधे जो दरख्त लगे हुए थे उनकी ब्रांचेस को पकड़ते हुए ही हॉल्ड आई हॉल्ड माई सेल्फ अप टू द डोर. Hauled means he pulled himself up towards the door and entered. Strange. Seated on a small stool in the doorway was a little boy, 7 or 8 years old, elbows on his knees, supporting his face in his hands. अब जैसे वो एंटर होता है उस डोर से तो व्हाट कुड ही कुड सी अ स्मॉल बॉय हु वाज 7 or 8 years old and he was sitting on a stool in the doorway and actually he was putting his elbows on his knees. टांगों के ऊपर अपने घुटनों के ऊपर उसने अपनी एल्बोज रखी हुई थी और उन एल्बोज को इस तरह से प्लेस किया हुआ था कि अपने हाथों में उसने अपने फेस को रखा हुआ था एंड एज इफ ही हैड बीन सपोर्टिंग हिज फेस. यू कैन वेल अंडरस्टैंड द पोजीशन ऑफ दैट बॉय. जिस तरह से हम अपनी टांगों को ऊंचा करके उसके ऊपर अपनी एल्बोज रख के और हाथों में अपने जो है वो अपनी फेस को रख के जो है अपने फेस को सपोर्ट कर रहे होते हैं. दिस वाज एक्चुअली हिज पोजीशन. हिज चीक्स वर रेड and with cold. He had been peering at the opposite cliffside through a rent in the curtain. He glanced at me briefly as I came in, then went back to his observation. Okay, what that boy had been doing. That boy was red, and it was all because of the cold over there. And he was sitting that was at the entrance door. So definitely the air was touching his face. The air was definitely, it was cold, and that had made his face red. He had been peering at the opposite cliff side. Peering means he was glancing. He was looked in a very fixed way towards the opposite cliff side through a rent. Rent is a small opening. एक कह लें कि भी एक शिगाफ था that was in the curtain, that was made in the curtain, and through that rent he was looking towards, or he was peering at the opposite cliff side. He glanced at me briefly as I came in. So when he entered into that cave, he looked towards the narrator for a short time, and then he continued what he had been doing before. He continued with that activity. The cave was large but quite warm. It had a stove and eating utensils. On the wall above a bed was a colored New Year picture of chubby children pulling the turnip. All the walls had been papered with old newspapers, now blackened by smoke from the stove. It was a cave क्या होगा, थोड़ा सा सेमी सर्कल फॉर्म में होगा, एंड डेफिनेटली एक उसकी हेड साइड होगी. दैट हेड साइड देयर वाज अ पोस्टर, एंड व्हाट वाज ऑन द पोस्टर, उसमें chubby children हैं, those who had been pulling the turnip. Chubby means they were fat and fresh and red faced children. The picture of, or the poster of the chubby children, and all the other walls of the cave, they had been covered with newspapers, with old newspapers, and now the color of those newspapers had been changed. It was all because of the stove that they use in the cave, and definitely when they lit the stove तो उसका स्मोक होगा. उस स्मोक की वजह से जो है वो सारी बाकी की अखबारें जो है वो काली हो चुकी हुई थी. All the walls were black. Just that poster that was at front of chubby children pulling the turnip, this was clear. So why isn't anybody home? I asked, shaking the snow from my coat and hat. The little boy turned his head. His eyes flashed. Aren't I anybody, uncle? He rose and walked towards me, his hands behind his back, his chest extended. Okay, then definitely the question that came to the narrator's mind, that there is no one at home. He asked this question to the boy while shaking the snow off from his coat and hat. And the boy, he turned and his eyes flashed. So he went near to that person and asked that, aren't I anybody, uncle? वो क्या कहता है, उससे क्या पूछता है, उससे कहता है कि क्या मैं anybody near you? You said that why isn't anybody home? So I'm anybody at home. He rose and walked towards me. So his hands behind his back, his chest extended, जैसे कि grown up बच्चे करते हैं, अपनी chest को extend कर लेते हैं कि yes I am something. So he wanted to show this attitude that he is someone, he is anybody. He pushed my hands aside, doubling up his fist. He cocked his head to one side and demanded, "Who are you calling him?" Okay, I think a paragraph or a few lines are missed, in which he called him imp, and the imp is a devil, is a naughty child. So actually what he did, he pushed my hands aside and doubling up his fist. Okay, the writer might have touched the boy's face, and he put his hands aside. He did not want him to be frank with him, and then doubling up his fist, he cocked his head to one side and demanded. ओके, डबलिंग अप हिज फेस मीन्स हाथ के ऊपर उसने हाथ रख के इसको एक फिस्ट की फॉर्म में बनाया, और उसके ऊपर जो है ही टिल्टेड हिज हेड टू वन साइड एंड डिमांडेड, who are you calling imp? किसको कह रहे हो भाई devil? I have a name. Pointing at the baby girl asleep on the bed, he informed me her name is Pao Chang and mine is Cheng Yu. So he did not allow the person to be frank with him or to call him with some other name. So he told him that he is somebody and he should be treated as somebody, as anybody, and his name is Cheng Yu and his sister name is Pao Chang. No doubt about it, these kids were like thousands of others I had met, born and raised on the construction sites. अब राइटर ये कहता है, नरेटर ये कहता है कि आई डोंट हैव एनी डाउट अबाउट इट, एज आई नो द लाइफ ऑफ द वर्कर्स ऑन सच साइट्स, ऑन द कंस्ट्रक्शन साइट्स. तो ये भी बच्चे जो हैं, दे आर लाइक थाउजेंड्स ऑफ द अदर्स दैट आई हैड मेट, दे आर born on the construction sites, and the workers, when they work on some site, they love to name their children with that construction site, of that construction site. अभी जो इसका नाम है Changju, probably had first seen the light of the day on the railway project between Chengdu and Chongqing, and also known as Yu, and his baby sister Po Cheng very likely had been born right here at the site of the future Pao Ki Chengdu railway. So when he told him his name and his sister's name, तो उसको फ़ौरन ये याद आता है, उसको फ़ौरन he just remember this thing that there are like thousands of the other children, those who are born in on the or raised on the construction sites, क्योंकि workers, they used to work on such areas, and they have the family over there, they raise the family there. So when the children are born, they are named after the project on which they have been working. तो इसी तरह से चैंगजू और पाओकेंग, इन दोनों के नाम भी उन डिफरेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स पे रखे गए जहाँ पे उनके पेरेंट्स जो हैं वो काम कर रहे थे. I sat by the stove smoking and rubbing the drying mud from my hands. Cheng Yu crawled on to my lap and looked into my eyes. Is it going to snow tomorrow, uncle? I pressed his icy red little nose. As soon as we get our telephone line connected up with heaven, I will ask for you. Okay. Then he sat by the stove side, and then he also did the smoking, and in order to make himself a bit comfortable with the heat of the smoke, and then he rubbed that dried mud from his hands when he fell on the snow. Might be some mud had fixed on his hands, so he tried to rub that mud from his hands. Then at that time Cheng Chu, he crawled, he just came into his lap and looked into his eyes, as he was very confident boy. He wanted to know about tomorrow's weather. So he thought him that he's a boy of 7 or 8 years old, so treated him like a young boy. He just played a joke with him that as soon as the telephone connection will be connected with the heaven, he would ask about the weather from there. Angrily, he leaped down and stood a meter away, scowling at me. Quit your kidding. You have got a newspaper in your pocket. Why don't you look at the weather report? So the boy, though he was 7 or 8 years old, but very mature and very responsible, he just came out of his lab and he stood at the meter's distance. He had shown his anger towards him. He scowled at him as he frowned at him, and as he did not like his answer, as if he thought that that the narrator had been treating him as a kid. So he asked him that quit your kidding, means stop joking. You have a newspaper in your pocket. So he was a good observant as well. He had observed that the narrator was having a newspaper in his pocket, and through that newspaper he could tell him about the weather report. He resumed his seat in the doorway, clamped his elbows on his knees, rested his face in his hands. बच्चा जो है अपनी annoyance show करके came back to his seats. He just sat down over there, clamped his elbows on his knees, and rested on his face in his hands, and peered out through the rent in the curtain. So continued with the previous activity. When I asked him where the kettle was, he ignored me. I certainly was sorry I had offended my small host. So he wanted to have a cup of tea, and he asked for the kettle, but he did not give any response. The little boy did not give him any response. So he felt a bit offended that um, he felt a bit sorry that he had offended that small host. Why do you want to know about the snow, Cheng Hu? I asked him. Is it because you cannot go out and play when it is snowing? So he wanted to make him a bit comfortable, or to make him feel that he was not taken as a kid. So he just brought him back into the discussion, and in order to develop a confidence that he was not taken as a non-serious thing. So he asked him that why you had asked about the weather for tomorrow. So, as if he wanted to go out to play, he didn't even bother to look at me. Papa says, if it's still snowing tomorrow, we will have to quit work. He was worried about the job of his father, that if the snow will continue to fall, then the father, he has to quit work, he has to leave the work. So that is all for today, students. It will be continued. The rest part of the lesson, it will be completed in the next slides. Thank you very much.